He did not cry, not once, not even when you begged him to explain why he ruined the one good thing in his life. And that silence terrified you more than any tears ever could, because here is the truth nobody tells you. The relationship is over, the damage is done, and somewhere, behind a face that shows nothing, something is happening inside him that you were never allowed to see. In the next few minutes, you are going to learn exactly what a narcissist feels after they destroy a relationship. Not what they show you, not what they post online 3 weeks later with a new person on their arm. What actually happens underneath. And by the end of this, you will understand something that will change the way you see your own ending forever. Before we go further, tell me one word in the comments. If you are watching this because you just went through this exact thing, type the word recognize. If you already know someone who ended a relationship like this, type the word familiar. I read every single one of these, and it helps me know exactly what to cover next. Now let's get into it. If you have not already, hit subscribe right now before you keep watching. This channel breaks down narcissistic behavior in a way you will not find anywhere else, and new videos come out every single week that could save you months of confusion. Comment the word insight if you want more videos exactly like this one. And stay with me, because what I am about to explain next will completely change how you interpret the silence you got after everything ended. Let's start with the biggest myth out there. People assume that narcissists feel nothing when a relationship ends, that they are simply empty inside, incapable of any real emotion, gliding through the wreckage like nothing happened. That is not accurate. And honestly, that myth is part of what keeps survivors stuck, because if you believe the person who hurt you felt literally nothing, then their cruelty starts to feel personal in a way that eats you alive. The truth is more complicated, and in some ways more disturbing. Narcissists do feel something after a relationship ends. The problem is not the absence of feeling. The problem is what they do with the feeling the moment it arrives. Most people, when they feel grief or shame or fear, sit with it. They let it move through them. It hurts, but it passes, and on the other side of that pain is growth. A narcissist cannot do that. The moment an uncomfortable feeling rises up, their entire psychological system treats it like a 5-alarm fire. It has to be extinguished immediately, no matter the cost, no matter who gets burned in the process. And that is where the real story of what happens after they destroy a relationship begins. Picture the final days of the relationship. Maybe there was a huge blow-up. Maybe he said something so cold it still replays in your head at 3 in the morning. Maybe he just disappeared without a word, ghosting you after months or years like you were a stranger. From your side, that ending was catastrophic. It shattered your sense of safety, your sense of self, maybe even your sense of what was real. But from his side, in that exact moment, something very different was happening. There was a strange, almost chemical sense of relief. This is one of the hardest things for survivors to accept. In the immediate aftermath of destroying the relationship, many narcissists feel lighter. Not sad, not devastated, lighter, like a weight has been lifted. Because for weeks or months before that ending, you were probably asking questions. You were probably noticing inconsistencies. You were probably starting to see through the mask just a little. And every one of those moments where you got close to the truth felt to him like a threat. Ending the relationship, even in the most brutal way possible, shut down the threat. It silenced the questions. It ended the pressure of being seen. So in the first hours, sometimes the first days, there can be a kind of high, a sense of power, a sense of having escaped something. This is why you might have seen him posting like nothing happened, going out with friends, looking suspiciously fine, while you were falling apart in a way that felt like the floor had disappeared beneath you. That contrast is not a coincidence, and it is not because he loved you less than you loved him. It is because you were both having two completely different emotional experiences of the exact same event. But here is where it gets interesting, and this is the part almost nobody explains properly. That relief does not last. It cannot last because it was never built on anything solid. It was a chemical spike, not a resolution. And underneath that spike, something else is already starting to stir, whether he is aware of it or not. Let's talk about what happens when the high wears off. Usually this happens faster than people expect. Sometimes it is days, sometimes it is weeks, but eventually, the initial rush of freedom fades, and what is left behind is a kind of quiet that a narcissist finds almost unbearable. This is the part they will never post about. This is the part no ex-partner ever gets invited to witness. This is what happens in the empty apartment late at night when the phone stops buzzing with congratulations and nobody is around to perform for. Underneath the grandiosity, underneath the confidence, underneath the way he could look you dead in the eye and tell you the breakup was your fault, there is an emptiness that has been there since long before you ever met him. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a kind of hollow core, a sense of internal deadness that narcissistic people carry with them their entire lives. Most of their behavior, the charm, the validation seeking, the control, the constant need for admiration, all of it exists to keep that hollow feeling covered up. A relationship, especially in its early stages, is one of the most effective tools for covering it up. You made him feel real. You made him feel important. You made the emptiness go quiet, at least for a while. When the relationship ends, especially when he is the one who caused the ending, that cover is gone, and the hollowness comes rushing back in louder than before, because now there is also the underlying awareness, buried deep, rarely acknowledged even to himself, that he did this. He broke the thing that was keeping the emptiness at bay. This is where something surprising happens. Instead of grief, instead of remorse, what surfaces first is usually rage. This is important, so listen closely. In a narcissist's internal world, uncomfortable feelings do not stay uncomfortable feelings for long. They get converted. Sadness gets converted into anger. Shame gets converted into blame. Fear gets converted into control. This conversion happens so fast and so automatically that the narcissist himself often has no idea it is even happening. He does not consciously think, I feel ashamed of what I did, so I am going to get angry instead. It happens below the surface, like a reflex, the same way your hand pulls away from a hot stove before your brain even registers pain. So in the weeks after the relationship ends, if you noticed him lashing out, starting arguments over nothing, suddenly furious at you for things that happened months ago, or even furious at people who had nothing to do with the relationship at all, that anger was rarely about the actual target. It was about managing an internal state that felt unbearable. Anger feels powerful. Anger feels like control. Shame and grief feel like weakness, like exposure, like the exact hollow emptiness he has spent his entire life running from. Given the choice between feeling weak or feeling powerful, even through destructive rage, the decision is not really a decision at all. It is automatic. Now let's talk about the part that confuses almost every survivor, the rewriting of the story. If you have gone through this, you know exactly what I mean. Somehow, in his retelling, you become the villain. You become unstable, controlling, dramatic, impossible to please. The relationship that he destroyed becomes a relationship that you supposedly destroyed. And the wild part is, he is not always lying in the traditional sense. In many cases, he actually believes the story he is telling. This happens because of something called cognitive distortion. And in narcissistic personality patterns, it is not an occasional lapse, it is a core survival mechanism. Remember that hollow core we talked about? The deep sense of internal deadness and inadequacy sitting underneath all that confidence. If he were to fully accept responsibility for destroying the relationship, he would have to face that hollow core directly. He would have to sit with the truth that he hurt someone who loved him, that he ruined something good, that the failure was his. For most people, that is painful but survivable. For a narcissist, That level of direct self-confrontation feels like psychological annihilation. It is not just uncomfortable, it threatens the entire structure that holds his sense of self together. So the mind does something remarkable to protect itself. It rewrites the narrative in real time. Details get exaggerated. Your reactions to his behavior get remembered as unprovoked hostility. Your attempts to hold him accountable get remembered as attacks. Slowly, sometimes without even realizing it is happening, he constructs a version of events where he is the reasonable one, the patient one, the one who tried so hard, and you are the reason it all fell apart. This is not always a calculated lie designed to manipulate you, although sometimes it is. Often it is a desperate act of self-preservation, a mind protecting itself from a truth it cannot survive facing directly. This is why you probably could not get an apology that felt real. Even if he said the words, even if he said, "I'm sorry," it likely felt hollow, rehearsed, disconnected from any real acknowledgement of what he did. That is because a genuine apology requires standing inside the discomfort of having caused harm. It requires tolerating shame without immediately converting it into something else. Most narcissists simply do not have that capacity built. Not because they are choosing cruelty in that specific moment, but because the internal machinery for authentic accountability was never properly developed. Let's go deeper into the smear campaign, because this is one of the most painful parts of the aftermath for so many survivors. You are trying to heal quietly, trying to piece yourself back together, and meanwhile you hear that he has been telling mutual friends a completely different story. Maybe he's painted himself as the victim. Maybe he has hinted that you were the unstable one, the jealous one, the one who could not be trusted. This feels like a second betrayal on top of the first one, and in many ways here is what is actually happening. A smear campaign is rarely about you specifically. It is about managing his own image, protecting the narrative he needs other people to believe so that he does not have to face the alternative narrative, the one where he is the person who caused harm. Remember, his sense of self is incredibly fragile underneath all that outward confidence. If people around him started to believe the truth, that he was cold, manipulative, or cruel in how he ended things, that belief would threaten the image he has spent years building. So the smear campaign becomes a form of damage control, a way of controlling the story before the story can control him. There is something else happening too, something a little more unsettling. By turning you into the villain in front of others, he is also reinforcing that same story to himself. Every time he repeats the version where you were the problem, it becomes a little more solid in his own mind. This is how some people manage to fully believe their own distortions over time. Repetition builds conviction, even when the original claim was false. Now let's talk about something that trips up almost everyone who has been through this. The hoovering. Weeks, sometimes months after everything ended, after the silence, after the smear campaign, after you thought you were finally getting somewhere in your healing, suddenly there is a text, or a like on an old photo, or a friend mentioning that he asked about you. This is not random. This is not necessarily a sign that he suddenly grew emotionally and realized his mistakes. In many cases, it is something else entirely. Hoovering gets its name from the vacuum cleaner brand because the behavior is designed to suck you back into his orbit. And the timing usually is not random either. It tends to happen when his own sense of supply, meaning attention, admiration, validation, has started to run low. Maybe the new relationship is not going as well as he hoped. Maybe he is feeling that hollow emptiness creeping back in. Maybe he simply misses the specific way you used to make him feel important, special, adored. Reaching out to you is not necessarily about missing you as a full person with your own needs, your own pain, your own life. It is often about missing the feeling you provided. This is such a crucial distinction to understand because it changes everything about how you interpret those messages if they ever arrive. It can feel, in the moment, like proof that he really did care, that he is finally coming back around, that maybe you were not crazy for loving him as deeply as you did. But notice what is usually missing from these attempts at reconnection. Real accountability, a clear acknowledgement of specific harm done, a demonstrated change in behavior over time, not just words. Usually what you get instead is vague nostalgia, a comment about missing the old days, maybe even charm turned back on at full volume, but nothing that actually addresses what happened or why. Let's talk about what happens with new partners, because this part genuinely confuses a lot of people, and understandably so. It can feel like an emotional gut punch to watch someone move on so quickly, sometimes shockingly quickly, into a brand new relationship after destroying the one they had with you. It can make you question everything. Was I ever really loved at all? Was I just replaceable? Did any of it mean anything to him? These questions are painful, and I want to address them honestly. The speed of moving on is rarely a reflection of how much you mattered. It is much more a reflection of how unbearable that hollow emptiness we talked about earlier actually is. Remember, this internal void has been there long before you, and it will likely be there long after whoever comes next. A narcissist cannot sit alone with that emptiness for long. It is too threatening. So a new source of admiration, attention, and validation gets located and pursued quickly, sometimes within days or weeks of the previous relationship ending. This is not usually a sign of deep emotional readiness or healing. It is often closer to a survival strategy, an urgent need to refill something that feels dangerously empty. And here is something that might bring you a strange kind of comfort, even though it might sound harsh at first. The new relationship is very often following the exact same pattern that yours did. The early stage will likely look intoxicating, intense, almost too good to be true, because that early idealization phase is where a narcissist performs at their absolute best. All the charm, all the attentiveness, all the grand gestures that once made you feel like you had found something rare will likely be recycled and redeployed. But underneath the surface, the same hollow core is still there. The same inability to tolerate accountability is still there. The same tendency to convert shame into rage is still there. Time does not fix what was never built. It simply moves the same unresolved patterns onto a new person. This does not mean you should wait around hoping karma delivers some cosmic punishment. Because honestly, that mindset can keep you tethered to him in ways that slow down your own healing. But understanding this pattern can help release some of the sting of watching him move on. What you witnessed was never really about you being not enough. It was about a wound so deep and so old that no partner, no matter how loving, patient, or perfect, could have ever been the one to heal it. That was never your job, even though you may have spent months or years believing it was. Let's shift now and talk about something that rarely gets discussed, but is incredibly important. What happens to a narcissist's sense of identity after a relationship they destroyed? You might assume that his sense of self stays perfectly intact, unaffected, untouched by any of this. But that is not entirely accurate either. There is often a quiet, gnawing uncertainty that lives underneath the confident exterior, a kind of low-grade anxiety about whether the story he tells about himself and the reality of what actually happened are starting to drift too far apart. This is where something called narcissistic injury comes into play. Even though a narcissist externally may seem completely unbothered, even proud of how he handled the breakup, internally there can be a fragile awareness that something is not adding up. Deep down, in a place he rarely visits and almost never speaks about, there may be flashes of awareness that he was, in fact, the one who caused real harm. These flashes are usually brief, often suppressed almost as quickly as they arise, but they exist. And when they do surface, even for a few seconds, the discomfort can be intense enough to trigger exactly the kind of rage, avoidance, or impulsive behavior we already talked about. This is part of why some narcissists become almost obsessive about controlling the narrative long after the relationship has ended. It is not just about looking good to others. It is about maintaining internal consistency, keeping that fragile sense of self from cracking under the weight of an uncomfortable truth. The more insistent someone is about being completely blameless, the more it is often worth wondering what exactly they are working so hard to avoid facing. Now let's talk about grief, because yes, narcissists can grieve, just not in the way you might expect, and definitely not in a way that mirrors healthy human grief. Healthy grief involves feeling the loss fully, missing the actual person, their laugh, their specific way of comforting you, the small inside jokes, the particular comfort of being known by someone. That kind of grief is relational. It centers on the other person as a whole, complex human being. What a narcissist experiences after ending a relationship often looks more like grieving a role or a function rather than a person. He may miss having someone to come home to. He may miss the validation you gave him, the way you made him feel important, admired, needed. He may miss the convenience, the routine, the comfort of having a life partner arranged around his preferences. This can absolutely produce real sadness, real longing, even real tears. But notice the center of gravity. It is still, in most cases, about what he lost in terms of function, not necessarily what he lost in terms of you as a specific, irreplaceable human being. This distinction matters enormously for your own healing, because if you ever catch wind of him appearing sad, appearing to genuinely miss the relationship, it does not necessarily mean he has developed new insight into what he destroyed. It often means the absence of a comfortable, familiar source of validation has become uncomfortable enough to notice. That sadness can be real without being the same thing as remorse, insight, or love in the way you understand it. Let's talk about shame for a moment, because shame plays an enormous hidden role in everything we have discussed so far. Most people experience shame occasionally and painfully, but survivably. It is uncomfortable, but it passes, and often it teaches something valuable. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, shame operates completely differently. It does not feel like a passing discomfort. It feels like an existential threat, a directed attack on the very core of who they are. This is why accountability is so incredibly rare after a narcissist destroys a relationship. Accountability requires tolerating shame long enough to actually learn from it. But if shame feels less like an emotion and more like annihilation, the mind will do almost anything to avoid it. This is why blame gets redirected outward so quickly and so consistently. It is not necessarily conscious cruelty in every single instance, although sometimes it absolutely is. Often it is a desperate automatic defense against a feeling that has felt intolerable for as long as he can remember, likely dating back to childhood experiences that shaped this pattern long before you ever entered the picture. This brings us to an important and often overlooked piece of the puzzle. Where does all of this come from? Narcissistic patterns do not appear out of nowhere. In many cases, they develop as adaptive responses to early childhood environments where love felt conditional, where a child had to perform, achieve, or please in order to receive approval, or conversely, environments of excessive, unearned praise, disconnected from actual character or effort. Either pathway can produce an adult who never developed a stable, secure sense of self rooted in genuine self-worth, and instead developed an external, performance-based sense of self that requires constant validation to feel real. Understanding this origin does not excuse the harm caused. It is important to be clear about that. Explanation is not the same as justification. You are allowed to hold both truths at once. You can understand that his patterns likely originated in pain that predates you, while also fully acknowledging that his choices caused real damage to your life and that you deserved so much better than what you received. Let's talk now about what happens over the following months, sometimes years, if there is no intervention, no therapy, no real internal work done. In most cases, and I want to be honest with you here, the pattern repeats. The same hollow core remains. The same conversion of shame into rage remains. The same rewriting of narratives remains. The same cycle of idealization, devaluation, and discard likely plays out again with someone else, and then again after that. This is genuinely one of the more painful realities to accept, especially if part of you is still holding out hope that he will eventually realize what he lost, eventually change, eventually come back as a different, healthier person. Change is not impossible. People with narcissistic traits can, in some cases, do real therapeutic work and develop greater capacity for accountability and empathy over time. But this kind of change is rare, requires deep and sustained commitment, and almost never happens as a direct result of losing you specifically. If it happens at all, it usually requires years of consistent therapeutic work, often triggered by some other significant life crisis entirely unrelated to the relationship that ended. Waiting around for that transformation to happen, and to happen specifically because of what you two shared, is one of the most common ways survivors stay stuck in place long after the relationship itself has ended. So let's bring this back to you, because ultimately that is what matters most here. If you are watching this because you just went through something like this, I want you to hear something clearly. His silence was never proof that he felt nothing. His rage was never proof that you were the problem. His quick rebound was never proof that you were replaceable, and his eventual attempt to reconnect, if it ever comes, is not necessarily proof of real change or real love. What actually happened is that something in him got triggered when the relationship threatened to expose an emptiness he has been running from for most of his life. He converted that threat into whatever protected him fastest, whether that looked like rage, disappearing, blame, or a rapid replacement relationship. None of that was ever a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of an internal architecture that existed long before you and, without real intervention, will likely continue long after. You do not need his accountability to heal. I know that feels almost impossible to accept, especially in the early months, because the human mind naturally craves closure, an explanation, an apology, some kind of acknowledgement that what happened was real and that it mattered. But waiting for that kind of closure from someone who is psychologically unable to provide it authentically is like waiting for a storm to apologize for the damage it caused. The storm was never capable of remorse. Its nature was simply to move through and take whatever destruction that movement caused with it. Real closure, the kind that actually allows you to rebuild, comes from inside you, not from him. It comes from understanding the pattern clearly enough that his behavior stops feeling like a mystery and starts feeling like something predictable, something explainable, something that was never really about your value as a person at all. Every single thing we talked about today, the initial relief, the hollow emptiness underneath, the rage replacing shame, the narrative rewriting, the smear campaign, the hoovering, the rapid replacement, all of it traces back to the exact same source. An internal void that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with a wound that existed long before your story with him ever began. I want you to sit with that for a second. The ending that felt so personal, so targeted, so uniquely cruel, was in reality a fairly predictable, almost mechanical unfolding of a pattern that plays out again and again with different partners, different cities, different circumstances, but the exact same underlying architecture every single time. That does not erase your pain. It does not make what happened to you hurt any less. But it can begin to loosen the grip of the question that keeps so many survivors stuck at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, wondering what they did wrong. You likely did not do anything wrong. You simply got close enough to someone with an unhealed wound that your presence eventually threatened the walls built around it. And when that happened, those walls did what they were built to do. They protected the wound by destroying what was closest to it. If any part of this resonated with you, if you recognized even a fragment of your own story in what we just walked through, drop the word healing in the comments below. I want to know you made it to the end of this, and I want to hear, even briefly, where you are in your own journey right now. Are you still in the fog of confusion, trying to make sense of what happened? Are you starting to see the pattern clearly for the first time? Or are you already further along, rebuilding a version of your life that finally belongs entirely to you? Wherever you are not behind, and you are not alone in this. Before you go, if this video helped even a little, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what comes next. There is so much more to unpack about narcissistic patterns, about the specific stages of recovery after a relationship like this, about how to rebuild trust in your own perception after being told for so long that your reality was wrong. Comment the word growth if you want a video specifically on how to rebuild your sense of self after this kind of relationship, because that is coming soon, and I want to make sure it reaches the people who need it most. One more thing before we close out today. I want to talk about a specific behavior pattern that tends to show up in the months following a narcissist destroying a relationship, something survivors often notice but rarely have language for. It is the strange phenomenon of watching someone seem to thrive publicly while you know, deep down, that something does not add up. The vacations, the new photos, the captions that feel just a little too pointed, a little too aimed at an audience that includes you specifically. This is not accidental, and understanding why it happens can be incredibly clarifying. Public image for someone with strong narcissistic patterns often functions as a kind of emotional life support system. Every like, every comment, every bit of admiration from an audience serves as a small hit of validation that temporarily quiets that hollow internal emptiness we have been talking about throughout this video. After a relationship ends, especially one that ended messily, there is often an intensified need to perform wellness publicly, not necessarily because he genuinely feels that well, but because appearing to thrive serves multiple functions at once. It reinforces the self-serving narrative that he is the reasonable one who is doing just fine. It provides a fresh wave of external validation to replace what was lost when the relationship ended. And in some cases, whether consciously intended or not, it serves as a kind of message aimed specifically at you, a way of saying, look how easily I moved on. Look how little this affected me. Look how replaceable you truly were. If you found yourself hurt by this kind of performance, please understand that what you are seeing is very often a highlight reel constructed specifically to manage perception, both other people's perception and his own internal narrative. It is rarely, if ever, a complete or accurate picture of his actual internal experience. Remember everything we discussed about the hollow core? The rage masking shame, the desperate need for a quick replacement source of validation. None of that disappears just because a few vacation photos suggest otherwise. It simply moves underground, hidden behind a carefully curated public performance designed to convince the world and himself that everything is fine. Let's also talk briefly about something survivors often struggle with in the aftermath, which is the confusing coexistence of missing him and knowing logically that the relationship was harmful. This is one of the most disorienting parts of healing from any relationship involving these kinds of patterns, and I want to normalize it clearly. Missing someone does not mean the relationship was good for you. It often means that certain neurological and emotional bonding processes were activated during the relationship, particularly if the relationship included cycles of intense highs followed by painful lows. This kind of intermittent reinforcement, where affection and validation come unpredictably, tends to create bonds that are, ironically, even harder to release than bonds formed through consistent, stable love. Your nervous system adapted to a certain rhythm, a certain chase, a certain uncertainty that kept you constantly seeking his approval and attention. Missing that rhythm does not mean you miss something healthy. It means your brain became conditioned to a specific pattern, and unlearning that conditioning takes real time and real intention. This is also why so many survivors describe feeling like they are grieving an addiction rather than simply grieving a person. That description is more accurate than people often realize. The unpredictability, the highs of being love-bombed, followed by the confusing lows of being devalued or ignored, activates reward pathways in the brain in ways strikingly similar to substance dependency. Understanding this can help remove some of the shame survivors often feel about how hard it is to fully let go. It was never about weakness. It was about your brain doing exactly what brains are wired to do when exposed to unpredictable reward patterns over an extended period of time. Now, let's return to him for a moment, because there is one more layer worth exploring, and it is one of the more unsettling truths about what happens after a narcissist destroys a relationship. Over time, without intervention, the capacity for genuine connection tends to erode even further. Each relationship that ends in this pattern, discard, blame, rapid replacement, reinforces the same neural and behavioral pathways, making it slightly easier, slightly more automatic, to repeat the exact same cycle the next time. This means that with each subsequent relationship, the likelihood of real change actually decreases rather than increases, unless there is significant sustained intervention breaking that cycle. This is important for you to understand, not so you can feel sorry for him, but so you can fully release any lingering hope that time alone will fix what happened. Time does not heal wounds that are actively being avoided rather than processed. If anything, time without accountability tends to deepen the pattern, entrench the defenses, and make authentic change progressively less likely with each passing year and each new relationship that follows the same script. I know this can feel like a heavy, even hopeless picture, especially if you are still holding on to some version of hope that things could have been different, that maybe if you had done something differently, said something differently, loved him a little better or a little harder, the ending might have looked different. I want to be very direct with you about this. Nothing you did or did not do created this pattern, and nothing you could have done differently would have prevented this outcome. This pattern was already fully formed long before you arrived, shaped by experiences and defenses built over an entire lifetime. You were never the architect of his emptiness, and you were never capable of being the cure for it either. That was never a job available to you, no matter how much love, patience, or effort you brought to the relationship. What is available to you right now, in this moment, is the choice to stop trying to solve a puzzle that was never solvable, and instead redirect all of that energy, all of that insight, all of that emotional intelligence you clearly have, toward your own healing. That means learning to trust your own perception again after it was so often challenged or dismissed. That means slowly rebuilding a sense of identity that exists independently of his validation or lack thereof. That means allowing yourself to grieve, not just the relationship, but the version of the future you thought you were building together. Because that grief is real and it deserves space, even though the person you are grieving was never quite who you thought he was. Healing from this kind of relationship does not happen in a straight line. There will be days where you feel strong, clear-headed, almost amused by how obvious the pattern looks in hindsight. And there will be other days where an old memory surfaces unexpectedly, and you find yourself right back in the fog, questioning everything again, wondering if maybe you got it wrong, maybe he really did love you the best way he knew how. Both of these experiences are a completely normal part of healing from this specific kind of relationship. Give yourself grace on the harder days, and give yourself credit on the clearer ones, because both are part of the same process, moving you steadily toward the other side of this. If you have made it this far into the video, I want you to know something important. Understanding these patterns as clearly as you now do puts you in a category of survivors who are significantly less likely to fall back into a similar dynamic in the future, whether with him specifically or with someone new who shows the same warning signs. Knowledge like this genuinely changes outcomes. It changes what you notice in the early stages of new connections. It changes what you tolerate. It changes how quickly you trust your own gut instinct. The next time something feels subtly off, even if you cannot immediately articulate why. Before we close, I want to leave you with one final thought. The ending of this relationship, as painful and confusing as it was never actually about your inadequacy. It was about colliding with a wound so old, so deeply buried, and so thoroughly protected that almost nothing you could have done would have changed the outcome. That is not a comforting thought in the traditional sense, but it is a freeing one because it means the ending was never a referendum on your worth. It was simply the predictable result of two very different internal worlds coming into contact, one built on genuine connection, and one built on survival and self-protection at almost any cost. You get to walk away from this with your capacity for real love completely intact. That capacity was never damaged by what happened, no matter how damaged your trust or your confidence might feel right now. What was damaged belongs to him, a wound he has been carrying and running from long before your story ever began, and one he will likely keep running from long after, unless something finally forces him to stop and face it directly. If this video gave you even a small piece of clarity today, let me know by commenting the word clarity below, and consider sharing this with someone else who might need to hear it right now. Subscribe if you have not already, because there is a lot more coming on this exact topic, including deeper breakdowns of specific behaviors, recovery strategies that actually work, and real explanations of the psychology behind every confusing thing you experienced in that relationship. You deserve real answers, not vague comfort, and that is exactly what this channel is here to give you, one video at a time. Thank you for staying with me through this one. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video.